So, dear colleagues, welcome back to the afternoon session of the second day of the conference. I'm really pleased that I can greet here Montserrat Guibernau, who is coming from UK for the moment. She holds a visiting fellowship at the Department of Politics and International Relations of University of Cambridge. She is also associated to the Department of Sociology in the same university. She works with a forum on geopolitics, on activities related to state unity and secessionism, with particular reference to Catalonia, where she originally comes from, and Europe. Her current research focuses upon wider multidisciplinary intellectual agenda in politics and sociology, and it concerns key academic and policy debate about migration, nationalism, and ethnic diversity in EU and the US. As well, the study challenges posed by secessionism and ethnic violence, which is her focus. Mrs. Guibernau holds a PhD in social and political theory from King's College in Cambridge, and she finished her bachelor studies in philosophy at University of Barcelona. At present, she is also a member of Management Council at the Canada Blanche Centre, London School of Economics. In 2012 to 2014, she was really lucky and I would say exceptional in the term that she held a Leverhulme Research Fellowship on Identity, Emotions, and Political Mobilization. Congratulations for such endeavor. And the things which we read from her, especially those who are nationalism and intellectuals like myself, were Belonging, Solidarity and Division in Modern Societies, which was published by Polity in 2013, The Identity of the Nations, and Catalan Nationalism, among many other things which she also published. I'm really happy to host you here, and welcome to Belgrade for the first time, and please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade for inviting me to speak. It is a great privilege to be here with you today. I've been looking forward to this opportunity, and I just hope that there is something interesting for all of us to get out of this specific meeting and this specific session. I would like to warmly thank you, as I said, for inviting me. I'm aware that this conference is very different from the conferences, or from many of the conferences I have attended. And I think that it's different because we are in a land of communities recently damaged by war, where individuals have been brutalized, injured, killed. And I feel that we need healing to mitigate resentment. And it's very easy to say all these things. Somebody like me just comes in, takes the floor, and tells you all these issues. But I know that it's easy to be very critical, and that it is very hard to mitigate resentment. And it is in this specific context that identity matters a lot for many people. And I know that even the views of identity, the definitions of identity that we have, are going to be different in different instances. We do not always mean the same thing, even if the title of what we are talking about is the same. There is a complexity here that we have to investigate. To begin with, I would say that I find very, very important the connection between the concept of identity the concept of community and the concept of trust. These, in my view, are intertwined and are very important in our current world. Many of you may know that I've been working primarily on nationalism for quite a long time. And I know that nationalism carries a stigma. Nationalism is regarded by many as a malign force, as responsible for war and hatred among peoples. And I would say that this is true in many instances, but not in all the cases. In my view, it is impossible to talk about nationalism without explaining what do we mean by it. Because when we say nationalism, I argue that we are not all talking about the same thing. Because nationalism is not the same, doesn't mean the same, doesn't have the same objectives and the same treatment. It is my concern that nationalism is multi-faced and that there are different types of nationalism. I have to give you some definitions of what do I mean by this, so that at least we have an idea and we can begin to understand each other. Because, of course, if I come here and I tell you I'm a nationalist, do you know whether I vote left or right, or I vote Podemos, or I vote this specific authoritarian politics, or if I go for liberal democratic politics? Well, it's part of the work that I do that I think that nationalism as such is a doctrine of political legitimacy and is subjected to diverse uses and interpretations. And it is invoked by people seeking radically different objectives. This means to talk about nationalism is complex, very complex. Because in some cases, nationalism is a doctrine of political legitimacy. In other occasions, it refers to a movement which defends the rights of oppressed peoples. And there is no common agreement about how to define nationalism, and it seems unlikely that one could be reached in the foreseeable future. So let's relax and think that, well, we are not going to come up or come out of the room sharing a new and unified idea of nationalism. But it's not about that. It's not about competing or about telling anybody what they have to do. No. It's about trying to understand and see whether this makes sense, in what circumstances, and if there are things that could be good and things that could be improved. It's best not to aspire too high, but deliver, rather than have great aspirations and never start the project. This is how I see it. And this is the very small basis that I use in this presentation. I think that is undeniable, in my view, that nationalism stands as one of the most potent ideologies of the 20th and the 21st century. The power of nationalism stems from its dual character as a political doctrine and as a source of identity for individuals living in modern societies. It is in this context that we are faced with the notion of the nation, the relevance of the nation. It is my view that the nation, the concept of the nation, is important. I think the concept of the nation matters, and matters to many people for different reasons. But I think that the nation is a political construct that in some cases has a positive output, in some other cases has a negative output. So there is a certain ambivalence here, because whenever we talk about these specific strengths or weaknesses of nationalism, there is always this ambivalence that makes it complex. But now I feel that I have to tell you what are, in my view, the main strengths of nationalism, and I'll suggest three, and I'll be very brief. I think that nationalism, to try to understand what's about, there are three characteristics that define it. The first one is nationalism has a flexible nature, because nationalism is a political discourse capable of embracing very different political ideologies. Nationalism has been appropriated by Marxism, by liberalism, by conservatism, by right-wing, as well as fascist ideologies, among others. So basically, we need to respond to the question, what do you mean by nationalism? And the answer is different in each case. And this should at least help us to know what kind of ideology we are going to be talking about. From what I said up to now, I think that we should conclude that nationalism is insufficient as a program for political action, since the ideology to which nationalism is linked, or connected, decides how the nation will be constructed and what social, political, and economic policies will be pursued in its name. So, when somebody defines him or herself as nationalist, well, there are all these specific questions to respond to, and the response matters. The response is vital and crucial. There is a benign nationalism and a not benign nationalism. There is a benign nationalism and there is completely the opposite. So we've got the two. You know, this very well-known sentence that nationalism is Janus-faced, no? Facing smile here and closure on the other side. Well, I think that this expression is so successful because it really captures something which is very complex in a very, very small nutshell. When nationalism is benign, nationalism usually seeks to increase social cohesion within a given society, with the aim of fostering a sense of belonging and solidarity among its citizens, thus strengthening their consciousness of forming a group. All members of the nation, regardless of their social class, age, and gender, are included in this collective project. I'm telling you all this, which sounds kind of very positive, but we need to be aware that, and we need to examine what is meant by each one of these sentences. For example, nationalism seeks to increase social cohesion using what means? In what context? This varies, and this changes it. So maybe you will find that what I'm telling you doesn't say a lot. It just tries to say the little things that could be maybe said or understood in some of the points. The same way, there is this idea that nationalism tries, or in some cases, successfully fosters a sense of belonging and solidarity. Okay, but I argue that belonging per se has an ambivalent nature, because we know that belonging sometimes is an example of solace, an example of a place where we feel secure, a place where we are expecting to feel the solidarity, the support of others. That's right. But this is not the only phase of fostering a sense of belonging, because sometimes belonging could be turned into oppression. The person feels oppressed, feels under control, feels that is not really free to say or do or change things. So obviously, the difference between the two situations is huge, and the experiences of the people are also huge. So the question is how we can reconcile and find some kind of harmony, even if it's little harmony. Or maybe at the end, we conclude that harmony is not possible. But I'm not for defeat. I'm not here on to show defeat. I'm just here to say, well, what can we change? How we do it, and how we do it together, in a way in which we know there is going to be some distance, but not enough distance to be unable to communicate, to work together towards some common ends, to be solidary to each other. And if we are not, maybe this kind of social cohesions will help us to start and change things, because this is about providing opportunities for the individual, but genuine opportunities in which the individual is free. I'm not an utopian, I don't think I am, but I just feel, and now I'm going to tell you something that you will think is very, maybe very basic, maybe too basic, but allow me please. When the situation is so difficult as the one that we are looking at, not only in this country, but across Europe, when we've got all these threats of the rise of the radical right, for example, and when we have this corruption, and when we have a situation that I would define as a fractured world, we have to be aware that we have only one life. Maybe you think that this is not relevant, but when you think that, your actions change, your view changes. And I think that it's precisely in this context that the relevance of belonging and the relevance of solidarity makes sense. A society that's capable of solidarity is different. It's a society in which people have at least the possibility to have some support. Not always. Of course, the opposite is also true. But I would like to focus on what it is that we can make better with what we have. Of course, one can disagree with what I just told you and argue that the elites or the bourgeoisie, in order to legitimize and secure their privileged position, creates nationalism. That's Ernst Gellner's position, and he was always saying that, and it's true. Well, he taught me when I was in Cambridge, and it was, well, amazing experience, you know. But he was really, really strong in his position. And there was a big distance between the way he saw things and the way I saw things. Probably this happens to you too, but it depends very much on what's your background, my background. Where are we coming from? and where we would like to go. This changes, because then what's not on could be tolerated, and we are having a substantial change with this specific situation. It is true that Karl Marx wrote that, I'm quoting, "The working men have no country." This is a quote from Marx Engels, 1976. However, while it is possible to defend this argument intellectually, it does not seem to work when applied to specific situations. And this is, for me, important, because it's precisely applying all these ideas to different situations that has the possibility to regenerate society and regenerate expectations and move forward. Nationalism at present is a modern, potent ideology because it has an enormous capacity to mobilize large sectors of the population, cutting across class, age, and gender boundaries. This is very political. Some people will be radically against this view, but it's a view that in many places has worked, and a view that can be improved, bettered, transformed, and it will be in our hands to make it emancipatory for ourselves. Constructing a group or building a group implies setting up the boundaries of that group. And these are the differences between those who belong and the rest. This has to do with the ambivalence that cuts across all these processes that I'm trying to explain to you today. Because the differences between who belongs and the rest is a crucial difference. It's a crucial difference that changes the life of the individual and also the life of a community. It is about boundaries, and especially in a place like here where we are today, the relevance of boundaries is very, very important. Boundaries that are moving, that are shifting, that are changing, and that have the capacity to transform. But in my view, emphasizing difference does not necessarily mean encouraging hostility towards those who are not members of our group, those who are outsiders and do not belong. Difference can, in some instances, be portrayed as a source of value if respect towards the other, instead of hatred, is fomented. It is in conditions of scarcity and struggle for resources that the other is likely to be blamed for one's own problems and becomes an easy scapegoat. And in Europe, we all know a lot about easy scapegoats. Today we heard examples from different countries in the different sessions. I'm originally from Barcelona in Spain, and my dad still remembers vividly his experience of living in the, well, being a young boy in the Civil War, and all the changes, all the people that died in the family and outside. And all this, we don't want to repeat it. And now in the European Union, also in other places, but I talk about what I know. Also in the European Union, we can see, and this is a great concern to me, we can see the rise of the radical right, and we can see that, well, in my view, I think that in the next 3-4 years, we are likely to see some political parties from the radical right in power in Europe. And this is a source for concern, because, just talking about what I know, in Spain this matters. In France this matters. I suppose that here it also matters a lot. And precisely because of that, we should be careful. I see a danger of authoritarianism, authoritarian politics emerging and getting very strong. I'm not saying this as the spur of the moment. I mean, I've been doing research on these issues in the last 6 years, 7 years or so, and I've done research in different countries, and I've seen this. You know, I was there when they had the first attempts talking about Jean-Marie Le Pen, or talking about some other politicians, and they were not considered seriously. They were not taken seriously because they thought, oh, they never made it to anywhere, really, because they are too much anti, you know. And now they have become commonplace, a dangerous commonplace in many instances. I can say that it is in this specific context that difference can be portrayed as a source of value if we use the principles of respect for the other instead of hatred as something that has to be fomented. And it is in conditions of scarcity and struggle for resources that the other is likely to be blamed for one's own problems and becomes an easy scapegoat. I'm repeating this because it's very, very important that in these circumstances, solidarity can only make sense if it has the possibility to develop. It's a fragile world. I define this world as fractured, but also as fragile. A world that we should take seriously because it has the possibility to ruin another generation of Europeans and non-Europeans alike. And this is important. There is another strength of nationalism, which is a very difficult one. This has to do with the emotional character of nationalism. Emotions have been banned for a long time. I have always been, initially, very hostile to considering emotions as part and parcel of serious, what I call a serious work, serious research. But things change if, when you talk about nationalism, you are able to say, well, a nationalism has an emotional character, and this emotional character cannot be controlled, or it's very hard to control this emotional character. Because this emotional character of nationalism, by strengthening the consciousness of forming a group and setting common objectives, arouses deep feelings of love and sometimes hatred. So for me, it's precisely this ambivalence again, the one that defines the complexity of our current situation. There is even love for the country, in some cases, is fostered by the identification of individuals with a set of symbols and the internalization of their shared culture as a valuable asset, and the conviction that the nation is a transcendent entity. We can even go further, and in the words of Anthony Smith, for example, he would say, well, the ultimate sacrifice for the nation is giving up our own life in battle, our own life in the circumstances in which the individual is willing and capable of renouncing his own opportunity to live in order to benefit the community. But this is all right when you write it, maybe, but one has to think about the consequences of taking seriously all these assertions. And what consequences have emerged of that in different countries, not only in Europe, but also in different parts of the world, in Europe and beyond. I'm not going to talk for long, but I would like, before completing this, to talk about the mobilizing power of nationalism. I think that the greatest challenge for nationalism is to mobilize the people, and the populism comes in here, because when we put together the rise of the radical right and all these different elements and contrasts that I just presented to you, there is a point in which we think, okay, mobilizing power of nationalism, but then what kind of nationalism are we talking about? And I would say, while I identify the populist nationalism as one of the greatest dangers in our society. The populist great threat is how to mobilize the people. The strategy to do so follows a top-down process which in itself betrays the idea of populism as a bottom-up popular initiative. So depending who speaks, is going to speak from the top down. Depending who you listen to, is going to talk from the bottom up. And the appeal of populist nationalism shows great dynamism and momentum in its early stages, at a time when they are disseminating their critique of the status quo. Populists tap into feelings of isolation, marginalization, alienation, as experienced by important sectors of the population. And then suddenly we have elections in a country in Europe that month after month is incapable of renewing a government. Or, I suppose that you understand what I mean, you know, or holding elections in that government. They don't only have one set of elections, but another set of elections, and a third set of elections coming in. This, a while ago, was incredible, unthinkable. And now we've got that situation, which means that where is the impetus for democracy, for democratization? Where is the impetus for negotiation? Where is the impetus for better our societies, better our life chances, those of our children or our friends? And we have this. In a situation of economic hardship, as it is now in Europe, but as everything else, when we say economic hardship, it's not the same for everybody, because the levels of hardship vary substantially in an incredible way. But we have these big differences. But nowadays what we seem to have is prosperity in some aspects, but then people who are completely ignored and far removed from what's going on at the top of society, or in different situations. So many people feel excluded, and to feel excluded has consequences, because if many people feel excluded, then obviously this is a sign that there is something wrong with that society, and that something has to change. These feelings may or may not be objectives. However, what matters is whether they are perceived as real. This is as painful. How do people experience the current situation? the current, not, I would say, not only economic, but the political situation. And I think that populism plays on the tension between the power of popular sovereignty and the possibility of a tyranny of the majority. In its early stages, populist nationalism, displays great dynamism and momentum. And it is in the midst of all these different views and perspectives that the sentiment of belonging is experienced, at least by many, as being part of a community of faith, as an extended family. And there are some individuals that are carried away by the internal elan, which enhances the image they have of themselves, elevating them above all mediocrity. In so doing, they perceive themselves as valuable and capable of self-sacrifice. Under such exceptional circumstances, the individual might consider his or her death as a contribution to the life of the nation. This is a kind of heroic, mythic idea, but I think it's a dangerous outcome, or it would be quite dangerous outcome. So I think that I would just leave it at this particular point, because I feel that it's in the questions and the dialogue that may emerge that we could continue. Thank you.